30 Mind Body Minutes. This is the Trauma Research Foundation's weekly mini workshop series from bright and diverse voices in body-based healing. Please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. It tells YouTube this content is valuable and they'll show it to more people. We'll take questions from the audience at the end of the session, so feel free to drop them in the chat. And we're so happy to have you at Transforming Triggers, a top-down and bottom-up approach. This is session 1 entitled Somatic Awareness and Cultivating True Self. It's my great pleasure to introduce our presenter. Cardin Rabin is a nervous system medicine practitioner, an expert in the field of psychophysiologic disorders and co-founder of Chronic Fatigue School. Over the last 15 years, he has combined principles of bodywork, brain retraining, and somatic trauma therapies to help thousands of clients all over the world heal from chronic pain and illness. He is a regular contributor to the Trauma Research Foundation blog and has led programming for the Wounded Warrior Project, Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, and for Starbucks. Cardin, we are so excited to have you. Thanks so much. Take it away.
Thank you, Mary, and hello, everyone all over the world. I used to say good afternoon or good morning, but that's irrelevant now when people are tuning in from everywhere. So hello, wherever you are, and thanks for being here. So as Mary pointed out, this course or this series together is about transforming triggers, because triggers are really where so much of the effects of our dysregulation, trauma, stress, they show up in those moments where we're hit. And they're often some of the hardest times to feel a different way if we want to. And so the goal is to see if I can provide you with some insight and some agency on how to be more effective, be more comfortable in your body, and maybe even exhibit different behaviors in situations that have been challenging for you in the past. And with today, the series is five sessions. We're going to really do our best to make each session, whether you can make it to the whole series or not, stand alone and be valuable to you. And some of you today, you started seeing today is somatic awareness and cultivating true self. And I want to talk about true self for a moment. Some of you may have heard the term true self before. Some of you may have heard the word self with a capital S. But it shows up in a lot of different ways in our mind, body, psychological, and spiritual space. Because it is such a foundational and supportive concept in all forms of healing work. In Bessel's book, in The Body Keeps the Score, there's that big component on yoga, and he references Stephen Cope, who wrote Yoga and the Quest for True Self. So we have true self in that spiritual concept. Over in internal family systems, the self plays a really integrating role in being able to relate to the different parts of our psychology and our being. And then depending on what neuroscience there's this concept that the self, this ability to reflect back and observe one's own experience is also it's literally a capacity of the brain. It's the ability in part for the prefrontal cortex and the insula to monitor what's going on in other parts of the brain, like the amygdala and the limbic system. So true self in its most foundational form is the capacity to observe and reflect upon your experience of yourself, both in mind and in body. Most people's experience of true self, if they've done a traditional meditative or contemplative practice, has really about been trying to maybe maintain a non-judgmental state of observation. They might also be trying to reduce the amount of thoughts they've been having. Today, we're going to try to take this concept of true self to a different level, where yes, we are observing, we are in a bit of a contemplative state, but it is not a disassociated or separated state. And it's not just about non-judgmental observation. We actually want to use true self as a ground of being to support and regulate our mind body, our nervous system. And I have an expression, I say that it's with the true self with the observing part of you that can be compassionate and supportive and present with the rest of your mind body, that creates something that I call self-co-regulation. Co-regulation in itself being the ability of human beings through their relationships with others, through eye contact, facial expression, physical contact, prosody of voice. When we're with others, others' presence can regulate us. They can soothe us. They help give our own brain and nervous system cues on, whether we're safe or unsafe, right? When a mother comes and comforts their child, that's co-regulation. And it's in cultivating our capacity for true self that we expand our ability to get out of our own dysregulation and perhaps some of the confusion going on in our mind body, and then not only get out of it, but then reference back into it and potentially create some change. So that's what we're going to play around with today. And your great task, if you choose to accept it, is to listen and follow along if it works for you. If at any point what I'm leading is uncomfortable or not helpful, you can stop and just observe. This is going to be a closed eye practice for most of us, but if having your eyes closed isn't comfortable for you or it doesn't feel right, you're welcome to keep your eyes open. And the last invitation is that if you do have a contemplative or meditative practice, that will be helpful, but I also want you to consider kind of having a beginner's mind and trying on what we're going to be doing today. And so for starters, I would invite all of you to get comfortable, take a moment, and we're going to close our eyes. And the first invitation is to notice how you are, which is an invitation to notice how you are, not to relax or necessarily change anything. If you were to just close your eyes and tune into maybe the area of your chest, getting a sense of whether your breathing is easeful or restricted. Allowing the attention to maybe wander to other parts of your body that are coming to your attention, either maybe an area that has some muscular tension, maybe some ache. Maybe you're dropping in and noticing and you're feeling pretty good. You can get a sense if you're comfortable, and if you are uncomfortable, you can make some adjustments to make yourself so. Also, you are free to move during any part of this practice. Often, mindful practices can feel restrictive, so move or adjust at any time. And then in addition to noticing some of the qualities in the body, I'd invite you to take a moment and notice the quality of your thought. Are your thoughts fast or slow? Focused or scattered? Present or elsewhere? Reminding you that the invitation isn't to correct or fix or change, but to simply note. And now that you've noted what's present, and now I want you to simply note and continue to monitor the movement of your breath. Not focusing on breathing, but focusing on how your body feels, how breathing feels in your body. How do you know you're breathing? What parts of your body are letting you know that expansion and contraction, that respiration is occurring? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your back? Do you feel it in the rise and fall of your shoulders? Do you feel it in your belly? And for the next 20 seconds, I invite you to do nothing but to enjoy the act of observing your body move in response to your breath. And before we proceed, I'd like you to take a moment and notice if anything has shifted in your body or your mind. Tension, comfort, speed of thought, presence or scout or elsewhere, simply from taking that short period of time to observe. And again, take a little Polaroid of how the mind and the body are doing so that we can check back in with it as we progress. My next invitation is that throughout human history, there is the archetype of the sage, the monk, the meditator, the spirit seeker, the contemplator. Every tradition, every continent, every people, the medicine man, the shaman. And I would invite each and every one of you to take a minute to imagine and bring to your own awareness this concept, this archetype of the sage, the monk, the yogi, the meditator. And as your visualization of this meditator, this contemplator starts to come alive in your mind, I'm going to invite you with this imagination. I'm going to invite you to pretend with me. I invite you to pretend that for the remaining time that we have together, that you are the monk. You are the shaman, the medicine woman, the meditator. And if you were this archetype, how would you feel? What would your posture be like? What would the expression on your face be like? What would your vibe, attitude, disposition be like? And I invite you to take a moment to once again notice how your body feels as you begin to inhabit this state of the archetype of the monk. Has your muscle tension changed? Has your breathing quality shifted? Has anything changed in your quality of mind? Nice. And as you're cultivating and allowing yourself, again, for this period of time to pretend and to be this archetype, I want you to consider that awareness, consciousness, that it truly is what it is attention. It's not thought. It's not necessarily action. It's simply attention. And that attention and thinking and acting are different things. And I'd like you to pull your contemplative, your spiritual seeker attention up to your brow, to the third eye. To just imagine that your attention, your awareness, your consciousness was dwelling right there in the middle of your brow. And that you know how to do this because in this moment you are the medicine woman, the shaman. And when you're in your third eye, your brow, there's an elevation of your attention. There's an elevation of your perspective. We begin to gain height in order to expand our capacity to observe ourselves. And I'm going to invite you, monk, meditator, spirit seeker, sage, to come with me one more step from the third eye to your crown and 1 inch above your head. To the penthouse, to the box seats of your being. Gathering your attention at the very top. And how does it feel to be elevated? To be part of yourself, but above yourself at the same time. To have this perhaps sense sensationally that your consciousness, your awareness, your being, while in the crown of your head, is part of what's separate from the mind and the body below it. And now I'm going to invite you to infuse your sage consciousness, your sage awareness, your shaman, medicine woman attention at the top, the crown of your head. I want you to infuse it with some qualities. And the first quality that I invite you to infuse it with is simply that it cares. That there's this true self, this capacity in you honored by spiritual path, psychological paths, neurological paths. There's this true self, and this observing self cares about you. And can you notice if your mind and body react, respond at all to the experience that there is an observing part of you that cares? And next, I'd invite you to infuse this quality of true self, that it's in no rush and it has all the time in the world to be with you and for you. It cares so much more about being with you than fixing or correcting or being critical. In fact, your true self is never critical. And lastly, I'd invite you to infuse your true self with the qualities of a loving parent and teacher. And I want you to notice or observe if your mind and body, intention, quality of breath, ease, quality of mind in terms of settling of your thoughts, or maybe even feeling good. If the body and the mind are responding to this presence of your true self with its care, its infinite patience, and its commitment to supporting you like a parent and guiding you like a teacher. And maybe you can smile and kind of give yourself a little bit of awe at how you've stepped into the act, the role, the capacity of sage, of monk, of meditator, of shaman. And perhaps giving yourself access to true self on a random Tuesday afternoon, or, wherever you are in the world, and that's something really special and to be honored and appreciated. And with that, I invite you to gently open your eyes, mobilize your body a little bit, and come back. And notice how you feel. And know that this is available to you. That your own capacity to be in your true self, and then self co-regulate, self-relate, is available to you at any time. And with that, I think that we will we'll go to questions in just a moment, but that this practice is in SE language. We might use, we'd say it's a resource. It's a place that brings a positive state to our nervous system, but it's much more than being a resource. It's a ground of being and an area of your mind and brain that gives you the capacity to do a tremendous amount of self-healing work. All right.
Hello. Just going to give everybody an opportunity to check their questions in the chat or any comments they'd like. We can have them answered in a minute. In the meantime, I guess I would just like to ask, how did you come to this work? Where, what brought you here?
Are you asking me that or the people in the chat?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a bit of a long story, but essentially what brought me to this work was my own pain. I was in chronic pain for many, many, many years, and in seeking solutions in body work, in yoga, in contemplative practice, I've always been looking. And I was very fortunate about 5 or 6 years ago to be introduced to something called the psychophysiologic disorders, John Sarno's TMS work, which is a lot about how pain in the body is related to psycho-emotional issues that we haven't necessarily accessed. And I can simply say that from there, especially doing trauma studies and trauma research and brain and neuroscience, there's this beautiful meeting ground of the spiritual, the psychological, the neurological, that all this stuff springs from.
There's a lot of appreciation in the chat. Absolutely beautiful, incredible. Feel self-love for a change. It was awesome. Thank you. A lot of appreciation.
Thank you.
I do see one question here. Someone's asking, I love the idea of co-regulating with self. How do you describe this to your clients?
Yeah, well, so the way I describe it is what we did today was a beginning of a practice among many where we have to create space from our own experience to allow us to influence our experience. Because when we're in it, right, you guys have been there before, right? Where let's say, I like to talk all the time, like let's say we're in a fight with our spouse per se. And you've been in fights with your spouse where you're wrong, right? Where your intellectual self is like, oh, I screwed up, but you're in the fight, right? And your emotional system and your limbic system won't back down. And so it's gonna fight till the end, even though you know you're wrong. And without practice, it's really impossible to interrupt that process, right? Similarly, like when we're triggered, we can even be like, oh, I wish I could calm down right now. I don't want to be reacting this way. But the whole brain and nervous system it's just going on autopilot. And we always wish we could act differently. But if we've done no preparation and no practice to cultivate a true self, an observing capacity, that can do more than just see. You might have noticed today that this true self made you feel differently. Your muscles changed, your breath changed, your quality of thought changed. And so the way I describe it to clients is that we practice this true self capacity in and of itself, like we did today. And in a pretty short amount of time, we then will incorporate it with part style work where it can actually dialogue and interact with certain emotional components and certain psychological components of self. And then we actually, which we'll be doing later in the series, preparatory exercises where we safely simulate a triggering environment to activate some of the automatic, old neurology, as we like to call it, the habitualized behavior. But we do it in the presence of true self and different nervous system capacities. And we actually start practicing, not just imagining, it's a difference, being different. Right? So I think I went beyond the scope of your question, but this is what self-co-regulation is: having a strong capacity to reflect and influence and change how we're doing.
Good, thorough answer. There's a question coming in here from YouTube, and I'll let you sort of interpret it how you will. How do you not abandon yourself when you feel like a little kid?
How do you not abandon yourself when you feel like a little kid? I really hope I get this correct based on that, because I often feel like a little kid, right? And I don't abandon myself. My little kid feels abandoned, usually because he was abandoned or had the perspective and experience of having been abandoned, right? And so even using our work today, imagine that you were able to occupy sage or monk or that contemplative state. And then from there, look at that young person who feels abandoned and be like, wow. In that very moment of witnessing and connecting to that child that feels abandoned, you are literally not abandoning it, right? You are being present with it. You are connecting with it. It's feeling it. By the way, that part might not accept that initially. This work gets very nuanced, but it's in the capacity of having the observer seeing the abandoned child that we are at the beginning of healing an abandonment issue.
I think that's a great answer. Thank you. That is all the questions I see there. So if anybody has one real quick, we might have time for one more. But I would just like to add, when we were doing the practice, I really like the language you used around attention and focusing attention, and not being. That's all it was, right? That was attention. You didn't need to reach something in that moment, right? Like that attention is the
yeah, Pat. Yeah, the power of attention is phenomenal. Like, I often talk about, I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they have an insatiable desire for attention, right? That all they want is, daddy, look at this, daddy, do that, right? And what is attention in that moment? What's truly attachment? It is seeing them and being with them, right? Now, granted, we'd also like to bring the quality like love and joy, but it's really just like, she wants me to be there. And so attention is a profoundly regulating capacity, especially when that attention can be safely directed at self.
Yeah, thank you. Last question. Here we go. How can this carry on through the day? So how can you take this with you through the day? What's a good way to turn it into everything else going on when you make that?
Well, I'm going to answer that question by asking Pat or Mary a question. How do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Yeah. Practice.
Correct. Practice. So by using this technique, for example, one of the most beautiful times to do it is within the first couple minutes of the day, like either while still in bed or right after you brush your teeth. I like to say before the mental momentum of the day starts, before your habitual self is really owning your mind body for the day, to sort of give birth to a ground of being of your true self as you emerge from sleep. And if you can have a short, like how long is this? 15 minutes, maybe? If you could have this, a daily practice or an every other daily practice where you're, again, giving birth, giving practice to this capacity of self, it's going to start to expand. Then if you can deliberately dip into it, we call it anchoring, which will be a little bit later in our series. But if you're practicing it a lot, you can kind of just remember it and get some of that state, even if only 30 or 40% of it, for a minute or two. And I would invite you to do those in non-challenging parts of your day to, again, expand that capacity. And then as you expand it sort of in a non-challenged way, it can then be there for you more and more when the going gets tough. Again, with practice and with some of the other techniques we'll be using later in the series to create neural networks that start to associate stress and trigger with finding true self and resource, as opposed to the old path, stress and trigger, find survival mechanisms.
Simple, but not easy.
Correct. Yeah, I saw this hilarious reel on Instagram It's so funny. I thought it's so there's this guy who says, we have made our plan. And the brain goes, oh yes, great plan. And the other character goes, well, what is left to accomplish the plan? And the brain goes, let me check. And then he goes, yes, effort. And the other character goes, effort, you say? I find this revelation disgusting. And I laughed out loud because it's so true, right? That this stuff is hard because it takes effort, and it's new and it's challenging and it's confusing, but it's worth it, guys, right? Like riding a bike was new and hard and challenging and confusing and hurt, right, over and over again until you found balance. But then it was magic, and it changed your life. Well, bicycling doesn't change your life, but it kind of does. It's a wonderful thing, and I think this work is similar to that.
Yeah, thank you, Carden. This has been such a great session. So many of us, I think, are feeling more open, freer, more grounded. Thank you so much for being here today. And thanks so much to our audience. We're so appreciative of you. We're thrilled that you're here, whether you're new to TRF or you're already a seasoned part of our community. Join us next time for session 2 of this series called Resourcing Positive States. And you'll find past sessions on the TRF website. In the resources tab, look for TRF Tuesday Library, somatic offerings. Behind the scenes, we thank TRF team members, Pat Murray, Star Muhammad, and Connor McCann. I'm Mary Frangie, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Bye, everyone.